My name is Michael Bleets. I was a mechanic from Detroit. Nothing special. Just a guy who fixed engines, drank too much coffee, and spent his weekends watching old sci-fi movies with my brother's kids. If you'd told me 6 months ago that I'd be here, sitting in the ruins of what used to be Chicago, scribbling this down by candlelight while the world burned around me, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, and if you're reading this, well, maybe there's still hope. It started out of nowhere. One day, everything was fine, normal even. People were going to work, kids were complaining about school, and the biggest thing on the news was some celebrity scandal no one would care about in a week. Then the sky lit up. I remember standing in the driveway of my shop, wiping grease off my hands when I saw it. Streaks of light cutting across the sky like fireworks on steroids. Bright enough to turn night into day for a few seconds. At first, I thought it was some kind of meteor shower. Hell, everyone did. People were filming it on their phones, posting videos with captions like "once in a lifetime" and "nature's beauty." But then the streaks hit. They didn't explode like you'd expect meteors to. No craters, no fireballs. Just impact. Silent and eerie. The ground shook a little, but that was it. At least at first. The real nightmare came after. From where I stood, I could see one of the impacts downtown. A glowing mist rising from the point of contact like smoke from a fire that hadn't started yet. It spread fast, rolling through streets and alleys like it had a mind of its own. People who got caught in it didn't scream or run. They just stopped, froze in place like statues for a moment before their bodies began to change. I'll never forget the first time I saw one of them, a woman who'd been walking her dog near the shop when the mist hit her. She dropped the leash and stood there as her skin rippled and shifted like water disturbed by a pebble. Her eyes turned this sickly greenish-blue glow that burned into you when she looked your way. And then she spoke, or maybe it spoke through her. "We are biohumans," she said, or they said. Her voice wasn't hers anymore. It was layered with dozens of others, all speaking at once like some kind of twisted choir. "We are your future." I ran then. Not because I'm brave or smart or anything like that. I just panicked like any sane person would have done when faced with something straight out of a nightmare. By the time I got home that night, the news was everywhere. These things weren't isolated incidents. They were happening all over. New York, London, Beijing, Rio. Every major city on Earth hit at once by those glowing streaks and their damn mist. Governments scrambled to respond. But what could they do? Diplomacy doesn't work on something that doesn't care what you have to say. The biohumans didn't want peace or resources or even conquest, not in the traditional sense anyway. They wanted us. They called it uplifting, as if turning us into glowing-eyed drones connected to their hive mind was some kind of gift. At first, we tried fighting back with everything we had. Tanks, jets, missiles, but nothing worked. Bullets passed through their bodies like they weren't even there half the time, and when we did manage to hit them, they just reformed like nothing had happened. The mist kept spreading too, converting more people every day into those things. Cities fell one by one until only pockets of resistance were left. People like me who managed to escape before the mist swallowed everything. I ended up with one of those groups, a ragtag bunch calling themselves the Unyielding. Dumb name if you ask me, but after everything we'd been through, it fit. We learned fast that while biohumans were damn near invincible in direct combat, they weren't perfect. Not yet anyway. Their hive mind relied on these nodes scattered across the planet to stay connected. A weak point we could exploit if we were careful enough and lucky enough to find them before they found us. And then there was the signal. Somewhere out there, maybe deep underground or floating above us in orbit, they had a central hub broadcasting commands to their entire network. If we could find it and shut it down, well, let's just say hope's a dangerous thing when you've got nothing else left. So here we are now. What's left of us anyway? Holed up in an old subway station beneath Chicago while we plan our next move against an enemy that sees us as nothing more than raw material for their twisted evolution experiment. I don't know how this ends yet. Not for sure. But I do know one thing. They underestimated us. They think our emotions make us weak, that our anger blinds us and our love slows us down. But they're wrong. Those things are what keep us fighting even when every logical part of our brains tells us it's hopeless. They think our disunity is a flaw, But all it takes is one good reason for humans to come together against a common enemy. And most importantly, they think they've already won. But humanity has this funny way of surprising anyone who tries to write us off too soon. So yeah, my name is Michael Bleets. I'm nobody special, a mechanic from Detroit who got caught up in something way bigger than himself. But if you're reading this, that means we're still out here somewhere. I met them on what I thought was going to be my last day alive. It had been weeks since the invasion began, and I'd been running on fumes, literally and figuratively. My truck had finally given out somewhere along the outskirts of Chicago, its engine wheezing like an old man before sputtering to a dead stop. I cursed under my breath, grabbed my pack, and started walking. The city loomed in the distance, its skyline jagged and broken, like a mouth full of shattered teeth. Smoke rose from a dozen places, and the faint glow of Biohuman patrols lit up the streets like fireflies from hell. I wasn't heading toward Chicago because I wanted to. No one in their right mind would willingly walk into a city that had been swallowed whole by the mist. But I didn't have much of a choice. The countryside wasn't safe anymore, not with the drones sweeping through every few hours, scanning for survivors. At least in the city, there were places to hide. I was halfway across an overgrown highway when I heard it, a low hum, like a swarm of bees just over the horizon. My stomach dropped. Drones. I dove into the ditch beside the road, pressing myself flat against the ground as the sound grew louder. A moment later, they appeared, 3 sleek, black machines hovering in formation above the highway. They moved with an eerie precision, scanning the area with beams of pale light that cut through the darkness like knives. I held my breath as one of the beams swept over me, praying that the mud and weeds would be enough to hide me from their sensors. For a moment, it seemed like it worked. The drones passed overhead without slowing down. But then one of them stopped. The beam swung back toward me, and I knew I was screwed. "Run!" a voice hissed from somewhere behind me. I didn't think, I just moved. Scrambling to my feet, I bolted toward the trees at the edge of the highway as something whizzed past my ear. A bullet? No, too quiet. A dart? Whatever it was, it missed me by inches. "Over here," the voice called again, and this time I saw them. A man and a woman crouched behind a rusted-out car at the edge of the tree line. The man waved me toward them while the woman aimed what looked like a homemade crossbow at one of the drones. I didn't need to be told twice. The moment I reached them, she fired. The bolt struck one of the drones dead center, releasing a burst of blue electricity that sent it spiraling out of control before crashing into the ground. "Move!" she barked as another drone turned toward us. We ran together into the trees, zigzagging between trunks as beams of light sliced through the darkness behind us. The man led us down a narrow trail that twisted and turned so many times I lost track of where we were going. Finally, we reached what looked like an old storm drain hidden beneath a tangle of roots and vines. "In here," he said, pulling back a metal grate just wide enough for us to squeeze through. I hesitated for half a second. Storm drains weren't exactly high on my list of safe places, but another burst of light behind us made up my mind real quick. I crawled inside after them, just as another dart zipped past my head. The grate slammed shut behind us, plunging everything into darkness except for a faint glow coming from deeper inside the tunnel. "Who are you?" I asked once I caught my breath. The man grinned at me in the dim light, a lopsided smile that somehow managed to look both friendly and dangerous at the same time. "Name's Carter," he said. "This is Elena." The woman nodded but didn't say anything. She was busy reloading her crossbow with quick practice movements. "And you are?" Carter asked. "Michael," I said. "Michael Bleets?" "Well, Michael Bleets," Carter said with a chuckle. "Welcome to what's left of humanity." They led me deeper into their hideout, a network of tunnels beneath what used to be Chicago's suburbs. It wasn't much, just some scavenged supplies piled up in corners and a few makeshift beds made out of old blankets. But it was safe. For now. That's where I met the others. Sarah, an ex-paramedic who'd been patching people up since day one. Jamal, a former engineer who'd rigged up half their defenses with scrap metal and duct tape. And Maria, who couldn't have been more than 16, but carried herself like someone twice her age. There were maybe 10 of them in total, a small group compared to some of the resistance cells I'd heard about, but they were organized in a way that put most militias to shame. "We've been watching you," Carter said after introductions were made. "Saw you wandering around out there for days before your truck broke down. You could have helped sooner," I muttered. "We don't take risks unless we have to," Elena said bluntly. "Too many people out there already turned." She wasn't wrong about that. The biohumans weren't just converting people anymore. They were using them as bait. More than once, survivors had been lured into traps by someone who looked human but wasn't anymore. "So why help me now?" I asked. Carter shrugged. "Call it a hunch." Over the next few days, they brought me up to speed on their situation and their plan. It wasn't much yet, just an idea they'd been tossing around, but it was bold. Find one of the biohuman nodes controlling this part of the country and blow it sky high. "We've got intel on one not far from here," Jamal explained one night while sketching out crude maps on an old piece of cardboard. "It's buried deep underground beneath what used to be Millennium Park." "How do you know it's there?" I asked skeptically. "We intercepted some comms," Maria chimed in proudly. "Biohumans aren't as perfect as they think. They still make mistakes. And if we take out this node," I pressed, "it'll disrupt their hive mind long enough for other resistance groups to strike," Carter said grimly. "Maybe even give us time to figure out how to take down the signal." It was risky, borderline suicidal, but what choice did we have? Sitting around waiting for rescue wasn't an option anymore. Not when there was no one left to rescue us but ourselves. For now, though, we planned and waited for our moment to strike back against something that thought it had already won. We spent the next few days in the tunnels, hammering out the details of the plan. Jamal worked tirelessly on a device he called an EMP disruptor, cobbled together from old car batteries, copper wiring, and what looked like parts of a microwave. He claimed it could short-circuit the biohuman energy fields long enough to give us a fighting chance. Maria and Elena scouted the surface, mapping out patrol routes and finding supply caches we could raid. Carter kept morale up with his usual jokes and easy grin, though I could see the tension in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. For my part, I did what I could to help, hauling supplies, patching up gear, and trying not to think too hard about what we were up against. The others had been doing this for months. I was still new to the fight, but they didn't treat me like an outsider. Not really. In a world where trust was as rare as clean water, that meant something. Then everything went to hell. It started with a routine supply run. Maria and Elena were supposed to hit an old grocery store on the edge of the city, one we'd raided before without any trouble. They left at dawn, promising to be back by noon. When they didn't show up by nightfall, we knew something was wrong. "We wait," Carter said firmly when Sarah suggested sending a search party. "They know how to handle themselves." But by morning, even Carter was pacing the length of the tunnel like a caged animal. Finally, he grabbed his rifle and turned to Jamal and me. "You're with me," he said. "Sarah, stay here and keep things locked down." "What if they come back while you're gone?" she asked. "Then keep them here," Carter said grimly. "No one moves until we know what's going on." We left just as the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the tunnel ceiling. The streets were eerily quiet as we made our way toward the grocery store, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. Every step felt like walking on eggshells. Even the smallest sound seemed deafening in the silence. When we reached the store, my stomach sank. The front doors were shattered, glass scattered across the pavement like diamonds underfoot. Inside, shelves were overturned, their contents spilled across the floor in a chaotic mess. It didn't look like a fight. It looked like a storm had ripped through. "Maria?" Carter called softly as we moved deeper into the store. "Elena?" No answer. Then we found her. Maria was slumped against a wall near the back of the store, her face pale and streaked with blood. She wasn't moving. "Maria!" Carter dropped to his knees beside her, checking for a pulse. "She's alive," he said after a moment, relief flooding his voice. "Barely." Jamal pulled out a med kit while I kept watch, my heart pounding in my chest. Where was Elena? What had happened here? "Michael," Carter said suddenly, his voice tight with something that sounded like fear. I turned back toward him and froze. Maria's eyes were open now, glowing faintly with that sickly greenish-blue light I'd come to dread. Her lips moved soundlessly for a moment before that awful chorus of voices spilled out. "We are biohumans," or it said. Carter recoiled as if he'd been slapped, his hand tightening on his rifle. "No," he whispered. "No, no. Maria, or whatever she'd become, looked at him with something almost like pity in her glowing eyes. She resisted longer than most, it said through her mouth. But resistance is futile. Shut up, Carter shouted, raising his rifle. Carter, I started, but it was too late. The shot echoed through the store as Maria slumped forward, lifeless now in every sense of the word. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Jamal broke the silence with a single word. Run. I didn't need to ask why. The sound of boots, too many boots, was coming from outside now, accompanied by that low hum I'd come to associate with Biohuman patrols. We bolted for the back exit, just as they swarmed into the store, a mix of drones and converted humans moving with terrifying precision. Jamal tossed something over his shoulder as we ran, a makeshift grenade that exploded in a burst of light and sound behind us, but it barely slowed them down. By some miracle, we made it back to the tunnels without losing anyone else. But when we got there, it wasn't over yet. Sarah met us at the entrance with tears streaming down her face. It's Elena, she choked out before collapsing into Carter's arms. We found her deeper inside, a biohuman now like Maria had been before Carter had pulled that trigger. She must have been exposed during their last run, Jamal said quietly as we stood over her body after it was done. After Carter had done what needed doing again. No one spoke after that. Not for a long time. The group was shattered, not just because we'd lost 2 people in less than 24 hours, but because it forced us all to confront an ugly truth. No one was safe from this thing we were fighting, not even each other. That night, as we sat around our makeshift campfire in silence, broken only by Sarah's quiet sobs, something changed in all of us. We weren't just fighting for survival anymore. We were fighting for revenge, for redemption, for humanity itself. And if that meant risking everything on one desperate plan, so be it. We were still reeling from what happened to Maria and Elena. The group was quieter, more somber, and the weight of what we were up against pressed down on all of us like a suffocating fog. Carter had become more withdrawn, spending long hours staring at the maps Jamal had drawn up, muttering to himself about how we needed to hit the biohumans harder and faster. Sarah busied herself tending to the wounded, though there weren't many of us left to patch up anymore. And I try not to think too much about what we'd lost. It was easier that way. Then he showed up. It was late, probably past midnight, when we heard the faint knock on the storm drain's metal grate. At first, we thought it was another biohuman trick. They'd been using converted humans as bait for weeks now, luring survivors into traps with pleas for help or familiar voices. Carter grabbed his rifle, motioning for everyone to stay back while he crept toward the entrance. Who's there? He barked, his voice low but firm. Don't shoot, a voice called back. A man's voice, shaky but unmistakably human. I'm not one of them. Carter hesitated for a moment before opening the grate, just enough to get a look at whoever was outside. A moment later, he stepped back, gesturing for us to lower our weapons. Get in, he said gruffly. The man who climbed down into our hideout didn't look like much, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that made him seem like he might bolt at any second. He carried a battered laptop bag, slung over one shoulder, and wore glasses that kept slipping down his nose. Name's Theo, he said quickly, glancing around at all of us like he expected someone to kick him out at any moment. Theo Park. What do you want? Carter asked, crossing his arms. I heard about you, Theo stammered. The unyielding. I've been tracking resistance groups for weeks now, trying to find one that could actually, do something. And what makes you think we can? Jamal asked skeptically. Theo hesitated for a moment before unzipping his bag and pulling out the laptop. Because I can help you. Carter raised an eyebrow. Help us how? I've been studying them, Theo said, his voice gaining a bit more confidence as he opened the laptop and began typing furiously. The biohumans, their networks, their systems, everything. You're saying you hacked them? Maria asked, stepping closer to get a better look at the screen. Theo nodded. Sort of. It's not easy. They're using tech that's way beyond anything we've ever seen before, but they're not perfect. Their hive mind relies on these nodes you've been talking about, right? Well, those nodes are vulnerable if you know where to look. He turned the laptop around so we could see what looked like a complex web of glowing lines and dots. Some kind of map or diagram. This is their network, Theo explained. Or at least part of it. I've been piecing it together from intercepted signals and data leaks over the past few months. And what does this have to do with us? Carter asked. Theo took a deep breath before answering. I found a loophole. That got everyone's attention. A loophole? Jamal repeated. Theo nodded again, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up another screen filled with lines of code and technical jargon I didn't understand. Their hive mind isn't just biological, it's also digital. They're using some kind of advanced AI to coordinate everything across their network. But here's the thing, AI systems are only as good as their programming. And Carter prompted impatiently. And I found a flaw in their programming, Theo said with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A backdoor they didn't mean to leave open. He tapped a few keys, and the screen changed again, this time showing what looked like a string of commands written in some alien language. If we can exploit this, Theo continued, we could disrupt their entire network. Maybe even shut it down completely. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Carter spoke up. How do we know this isn't some kind of trap? He asked suspiciously. It's not, Theo said quickly. I swear. Look, I'm not exactly built for fighting. He gestured vaguely at himself with an awkward laugh. But this is something I can do. Carter studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, he said gruffly. Let's hear your plan. Theo's plan was ambitious, borderline insane, but it was also the best shot we'd had since this whole nightmare started. The closest node is under Millennium Park, Theo explained as he pulled up another map on his laptop. If we can get close enough to plant this, he held up what looked like a small device made out of wires and circuit boards held together with duct tape. It'll send out a signal that should overload their systems and force them offline. And then what? Sarah asked quietly. Then we take out the node while they're vulnerable, Theo said simply. It sounded almost too good to be true, which meant it probably was, but none of us were in any position to argue. We spent the next few days preparing for the mission, gathering supplies, mapping out routes through the city, and running drills until we knew every step by heart. Theo worked tirelessly on refining his device, while Jamal helped reinforce it with whatever spare parts he could scavenge from around the tunnels. But even as we planned and prepared, something felt off. There was tension in the air, an unspoken fear that none of us wanted to acknowledge, but all of us felt just the same. What if this didn't work? What if Theo was wrong? What if this was our last stand? I didn't have answers to any of those questions, and neither did anyone else. But one thing was certain. We couldn't afford to fail now, not when humanity's survival depended on it. And so, we waited, for dawn, for our chance, for whatever came next. The morning of the mission was heavy with silence. No one spoke much as we prepared to leave. Carter double-checked his rifle, Jamal packed the EMP disruptor into a reinforced case, and Theo clutched his laptop like it was a lifeline. Sarah handed out what little medical supplies we had left, her lips pressed into a thin line. We all knew this was it, our last shot. If Theo's plan didn't work, there wouldn't be another chance. Stick to the plan, Carter said as we gathered near the tunnel's exit. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. We get in, plant the device, and get out. No heroics. Everyone nodded, though none of us believed it would be that simple. The city above was a graveyard. Skyscrapers loomed like skeletons against the gray sky, their windows shattered and their walls scorched. The streets were littered with debris, abandoned cars, broken glass, and the occasional husk of a drone that had been taken down by some other desperate group of survivors. The air smelled of smoke and something metallic, like blood on rusted steel. Theo led the way, his laptop open and his eyes glued to the screen as he navigated us through the ruins. We're close, he whispered after what felt like hours of creeping through alleyways and ducking behind rubble. The node should be just beneath us. Millennium Park was unrecognizable. What had once been a bustling hub of life and greenery was now a barren wasteland, its iconic landmarks reduced to rubble. The ground beneath our feet felt wrong, too smooth and too cold, like metal hidden beneath a thin layer of dirt. There, Theo said, pointing to what looked like an old maintenance hatch half buried in debris. Carter and I cleared the rubble while Jamal worked on prying the hatch open with a crowbar. It gave way with a groan that echoed far too loudly for my liking. Down we go, Carter said grimly. The tunnel beneath the park was unlike anything I had ever seen. smooth walls that shimmered faintly in the dim light, pulsing with veins of green and blue energy that seemed almost alive. It wasn't human-made. That much was clear. "This is it," Theo whispered as we moved deeper into the tunnel. "The node's just ahead." We rounded a corner and found ourselves in a massive chamber filled with machinery that looked both organic and mechanical at once. Pulsing cables that writhed like snakes, glowing panels covered in alien symbols, and a central structure that hummed with an almost deafening energy. "That's it," Theo said, pointing to the central structure. "That's the node." Jamal set down the EMP disruptor and began unpacking it while Theo connected his laptop to one of the nearby panels. "I'll need a few minutes to upload the signal," he said without looking up. "We don't have a few minutes," Carter muttered, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. And then they came. The first biohumans appeared out of nowhere, stepping out from behind machinery like shadows brought to life. Their glowing eyes locked onto us as they moved in perfect unison, their voices echoing in that awful chorus. "You cannot stop us," they said as one. "Jamal!" Carter barked, raising his rifle and opening fire. Bullets tore through the first wave of biohumans, but did little more than slow them down. They reformed almost instantly, their bodies rippling like water before solidifying again. "I'm working on it," Jamal shouted as he connected wires and flipped switches on the EMP disruptor. Theo's fingers flew across his keyboard as more biohumans poured into the chamber. "Just keep them off me," he yelled. Carter and I held our ground, firing at anything that moved while Sarah threw makeshift explosives cobbled together from scavenged materials. The room filled with smoke and flashes of light as we fought desperately to buy Theo and Jamal enough time to finish their work. "Almost there," Theo shouted over the chaos. A biohuman lunged toward him, its glowing eyes fixed on his laptop. I tackled it before it could reach him, driving my knife into its chest, even though I knew it wouldn't do much good. It dissolved into mist beneath me, reforming a moment later just out of reach. "Got it," Jamal yelled as he flipped one final switch on the EMP disruptor. The device let out a high-pitched whine before releasing a burst of energy that rippled through the chamber like an invisible wave. The biohumans froze mid-step, their bodies flickering like static on an old TV screen. "Now!" Theo shouted as he hit one final key on his laptop. The central node let out an ear-splitting screech as its glowing veins turned red and began to pulse erratically. Sparks flew from nearby machinery as cables snapped and panels exploded in bursts of light. "It's working!" Theo cried out triumphantly. The biohumans began to collapse around us, their bodies disintegrating into ash as the node's connection to their hive mind was severed. The hum in the chamber grew louder and louder until it reached a deafening crescendo, and then silence. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the ruined machinery around us as the reality of what we'd just done began to sink in. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Theo sank to his knees, clutching his laptop to his chest like it was some kind of talisman. "They're offline," he said softly. "At least for now." Carter nodded grimly. "Then we need to move before they come back online." But even as we made our way back through the tunnels toward what remained of our hideout, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The fall of the biohumans wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. After Theo's plan succeeded and the central node was destroyed, the biohuman network collapsed like a house of cards. Across the globe, their hive mind fell silent, and the mist that had once spread terror dissipated into nothingness. The remaining biohumans, those who hadn't disintegrated when the signal was disrupted, became inert, their glowing eyes dimming as they crumbled into lifeless shells. It was over. For the first time in what felt like forever, humanity could breathe again. But victory came at a cost. Cities lay in ruins, entire populations had been wiped out or converted, and the survivors were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered world. Our group, what was left of it, returned to the tunnels beneath Chicago, exhausted but alive. Carter, Sarah, Jamal, Theo, and I sat around a makeshift fire that night, staring at the flickering flames in silence. None of us knew what came next. It wasn't until weeks later that we began to understand what we'd truly gained and what we could do with it. The breakthrough came from Theo, Of course. He'd been poring over the remnants of biohuman technology ever since the fall, determined to understand how it worked. We can't just destroy everything, he'd argued when some survivors suggested burning what was left of their machines. This isn't just alien tech, it's ours. It's human biology fused with technology. If we can figure out how they did it. He didn't need to finish that sentence. We all knew what he meant. At first, most people were skeptical. The biohumans had nearly wiped us out. Why would we want to use anything they created? But as Theo and others like him dug deeper into their research, they began to uncover something extraordinary. The very mutations that had made the biohumans so terrifying could also be used to heal. The fusion of biology and technology wasn't inherently evil. It was a tool. And like any tool, it depended on how you used it. The first real breakthrough came in medicine. Scientists discovered that the biohuman mist, which had once been used to convert humans into drones, contained nanites capable of repairing damaged cells at an unprecedented rate. When reprogrammed and stripped of their hive mind directives, these nanites became a revolutionary treatment for terminal illnesses. Cancer was one of the first targets. Using knowledge gleaned from biohuman mutations, researchers developed therapies that could target tumors with pinpoint accuracy, repairing or destroying cancerous cells without harming healthy tissue. Diseases that had once been death sentences, pancreatic cancer, glioblastoma, leukemia, were now treatable with astonishing success rates. But it didn't stop there. The same principles were applied to regenerative medicine. People with spinal cord injuries began walking again as nanites repaired severed nerves and rebuilt damaged tissue. Blindness caused by retinal degeneration was reversed using bioengineered cells derived from biohuman tech. Even genetic disorders like cystic fibrosis and sickle cell anemia were being treated with precision therapies that rewrote faulty DNA sequences. For the first time in human history, we weren't just fighting disease, we were curing it. Humanity began to rebuild itself, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. The scars left by the invasion ran deep, but so did our resilience. Communities came together to rebuild cities from the ground up, using both traditional methods and new technologies inspired by what we'd learned from the biohumans. Energy grids were redesigned to mimic the efficiency of biohuman networks, creating sustainable systems that could power entire cities without reliance on fossil fuels. Agriculture was revolutionized with bioengineered crops capable of thriving in harsh climates, ensuring food security for even the most vulnerable populations. And then there were the people, the survivors who had been converted into biohumans, but somehow retained fragments of their humanity. Many of them had been freed when the hive mind collapsed, though they bore physical and emotional scars from their time as part of the collective. Instead of shunning them, society embraced them as living reminders of both our darkest days and our greatest triumphs. I remember standing on a hill overlooking Chicago one year after the fall. The city was still a shadow of its former self, skyscrapers reduced to rubble, streets overgrown with weeds. But there was life again. Children played in makeshift parks while adults worked tirelessly to rebuild homes and businesses. The air buzzed with hope and determination. Carter stood beside me, his rifle slung over one shoulder as he watched a group of engineers installing solar panels on a nearby building. "You think we'll make it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "We already have." He smiled faintly, but didn't say anything more. Years passed, and humanity continued to thrive in ways we never thought possible. The knowledge we gained from the biohumans didn't just save lives, it transformed them. People who had once been written off as terminally ill or disabled now lived full, vibrant lives thanks to advancements in regenerative medicine and bioengineering. Even our understanding of ourselves changed. The invasion forced us to confront questions about what it meant to be human, and whether embracing technology made us less so or more so. In time, most people came to see that technology wasn't an enemy. It was an extension of our creativity and ingenuity, a way for us to overcome challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. Of course, there were still challenges ahead, there always would be, but for the first time in a long time, we weren't afraid anymore. I'm writing this now from what used to be Detroit, a city reborn as a hub for innovation and progress. The scars left by the invasion are still visible if you know where to look. Craters where buildings once stood, memorials dedicated to those we lost, whispers of fear in older generations who remember what it felt like when the sky lit up with fire. But those scars are fading with each passing day. Humanity isn't just surviving anymore, we're thriving. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes us truly unstoppable. Because no matter how many times we're knocked down by invaders or disease or even our own mistakes, we always get back up again. That's what it means to be human.